A Quiet Place Day One is the third installment in this franchise. The previous two, directed by John Krasinski, he steps back as writer and producer on this one and gives the reins to Michael Sarnoski, which is an odd choice when I first heard the news. He directed my favorite film of 2022, Pig. It's a very quiet indie with an all-time performance from Nicolas Cage, and so when I found out he was gonna direct this apocalypse monster horror franchise, it was a little bizarre, but I gotta say, he definitely proved himself. This film is pretty great for what it is. For the most part, it's kind of exactly what you would expect from a Quiet Place movie. We understand the concept at this point, that there are these monsters that can't see you, but they have supersonic hearing, and they can hear every single movement you make, causing the entire world to have to be silent in order to survive. And so if you like the first two films, you will at very least enjoy this one, because you see the same thing happen again. There's characters trying to sneak through a door, tiptoeing over some rubble, and even with this film, I lost track of counting the amount of times where this quiet scene would be set up, some would make some noise happen, and all of a sudden these monsters are chasing them, and we just repeat it over and over and over, and yeah, it's pretty horrifying at times. So I think it works both ways, that this movie benefits from this repetitive concept, but it also hinders it to an extent. And I think that's my biggest take coming from this film, is that this story could have existed outside of this universe. And what I mean by that point is that the tone of this film is quite different from the previous two. I think because part two took place immediately after part one, it did feel like a very continued story with the same characters and the same type of direction. But the tone in this film is honestly much softer, despite there being actually more going on. And what I mean by that is that there are plenty of quiet moments. And I don't just mean quiet by lack of sound, but I mean quiet as heartfelt, touching. There are plenty of moments where characters are just existing with each other, doing life, and we're hearing this beautiful score surrounding them, and you almost forget that you are in this monster apocalypse movie. And for the most part, I found it rather effective, and that is not an easy thing to do, especially within a film where we are being introduced to new characters. There are a few connecting points with certain things you'll recognize from other movies, but for the most part, the brand new characters are Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn, who are not only strangers to each other at the beginning of this movie, but also strangers to us as the audience. And with the original Quiet Place, the setting took place with a family. And so even though this family was new to us, it's very easy to latch on to them, to understand the dynamics and relationships they have with each other, and for us to feel the emotional stakes, especially after one of the most jarring openings in any film. So because we don't have a traditional nuclear family within this film, it has to do that much more work to get us on the same page of caring about these characters. And by the end, I would say it did that. But the main reason I think this film could have existed outside of the Quiet Place franchise is because it honestly doesn't seem that interested in adding to the lore of these monsters. There's nothing that new we learn about them. I would say that part 2 gave us way more world building. And even though Day 1 is in the title, that feels like a bit of a reach because it doesn't necessarily feel like a Day 1 film. We do see a brief glimpse of what life was like before these monsters came to Earth, but it happens so fast and we are immediately pushed back into this world that we already knew from the first two films. Instead, what I think the director does here that is so brilliant is he uses this as a background to tell a much more compelling story that he wants to tell. And that story is surrounded by the theme of death and us as humans reconciling whether or not we are ready to die. The two characters in this film both come from opposite ends of the spectrum. One of them is literally on hospice, so before she is even thrown into this world, she already knows that she's going to die very soon. And when she meets this other character, one that continues to reiterate over and over that he does not want to die, they balance each other out and they learn from each other what life is actually about, whether or not you're going to die. And I think that's absolutely beautiful and something kind of fresh that we didn't necessarily see with the first two Quiet Place films. And so could that story have been told without these monsters attacking New York City? I think it's possible. And I also think this is the exact direction that this franchise needs to go. Obviously, people love the gimmick of having to tiptoe around and whisper and use sign language to communicate. But if we continue to do that over and over and over without actually expanding the story of humanity and what these people are feeling in these situations. So while I do think this film has many flaws, mainly based around how it feels like we've seen these things over and over and over again in this franchise, I will applaud them because they are attempting something unique. And I do hope that if we see more films from this franchise, it goes down this path. So those are my thoughts on A Quiet Place Day 1. I would love to hear your thoughts if you've seen the film, so comment below if you have seen it, and I will see you next time.